Senator, welcome back to the show. How are you?
It's great to be back with you, Seth. All things considered, I'm well. When 1 in 5 mothers in America is describing her children under the age of 12 as being hungry, I'm great.
I feel the same way when you put it in perspective. I will say it's a little strange. This is the second time you've been on the show since we've left the studio. Once I've talked to you from my attic, and now I join you from my in-laws' house. And I want to say, it seems as though your colleagues in the Capitol are getting better about wearing masks. But do you still try to avoid them as much as possible, given the opportunity? Now that you have a good reason to avoid them?
I will tell you that I am still very vigilant about wearing. I've started to sometimes wear double masks, like the medical one, the blue one, and then, whatever the cloth one is over. They're wearing, since the president started wearing a mask, I've noticed many more people are wearing masks. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, it's more sad than interesting because, president, no matter who the president is, it's a reminder that they can set a good example. And it's a shame it took this long. But I think what everybody was saying is when the person who is in charge does the right thing, it's amazing how many people will follow that lead.
Right, and you're exactly right. I mean, that is the power of leadership, right? And it is incumbent on a person who has been elected a leader to actually understand the responsibilities of leadership. And of course, Donald Trump does not understand the responsibilities of leadership. A real leader understands that their strength is in how they lift people up and not how they beat people down. And that is something Donald Trump has never seemed to understand since he took office. So that's what's important, Joe Biden.
Someone who I would imagine you believed did understand leadership was your colleague, John Lewis. I know he's lying in state now in the Capitol. Can you speak about the example he set and your history with him?
Yeah, I remember having many conversations with him, but one in particular in his office, which was like a civil rights museum because he has just lived a full life of service, right? And from the time that he was a student and a young man through days ago. And he was an American hero, to be sure, but one of the kindest people that you could meet. I mean, Seth, it's the type of person who understands, again, that their strength, that their power, because he was a very powerful man. But it wasn't that he demanded or carried power. He just was power. He had powerful words. He had a power that was born out of a love of our country, a kindness, and that gave him power. And I'm going to miss him so. And one of the things that I don't think has come out as much about him, but I want to make a point of mentioning it, he was very encouraging of women and women in the professions and women in leadership. And so you can, the stories of Diane Nash, or even the stories that he would tell about the other women of the movement that inspired him, including Rosa Parks, was one of the first people in the movement who inspired him. And I'm going to miss him greatly, and I guess in a short way of saying it, it's this. John Lewis was about not only walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the sake of voting rights and the fight for equality in America. He was about building bridges. He wasn't about building walls. He was about building bridges. He understood the connection between people, and he was a connector. He connected the fight from the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s to what he did standing in the front of the line, talking about what we need to do around immigrants' rights, that it's a civil rights issue. He was a huge advocate and fighter for LGBTQ rights and marriage equality. He transcended all of these eras and periods of time, but always consistently fighting for equality and dignity for all people.
I know that you are now, as we speak of dignity for all people, oftentimes that is the case of having the money to support your family, to put food on the table. You were debating the $600 that's about to expire. Can you speak to why that number is both economically and morally sound. And also, can you speak to the argument that by giving Americans money, we are disincentivizing them to return to a workforce, even though those jobs in most cases aren't there?
So we have had over 40 million people at one time or another in the last few months lose their jobs. Currently, we have a number of about 17 million people are currently unemployed. Interestingly enough, 50% of African-American workers are now unemployed since the pandemic. In June, Seth, 1/3 of Americans were not able to pay their housing costs, rent or mortgage. 1 in 5 mothers, like I said earlier, is describing her children under the age of 12 as being hungry. People are hurting in America, hurting deeply. And so what I am proposing is that during the course of this pandemic, until we have seen our way out of it, there should be a moratorium on evictions, a moratorium on foreclosures, that there should be a moratorium, which means basically a pause on turning off people's utilities, including their water service, because by the way, people can't pay their water bills when they are not working, and you need to wash your hands to protect your family from the virus. So that's what my Relief Act calls for, which is to give people relief and let them just, to the extent that we can, survive through the course of this pandemic so that at the end of it, they can get back on their feet. We don't want people to fall further and further through the cracks because at some point we need to recover. And so let's see people and carry them through these days and these months to get on the other side and with dignity.
I do, because obviously this is a very serious topic we're talking about, but on a lighter side, I do want to compliment the Relief Act is an acronym. I want to make sure I get this right. Rent Emergencies Leave Impacts on Evicted Families Act. Who comes up with these acronyms, Senator?
There's like a whole group of people who work on those things. It's really, it's kind of part of the funny art of the United States Congress. Like there are people who spend a lot of time coming up with these acronyms, and they're often very good, including.
And I mean, I guess the goal of these acronyms is you want to make it so that, you know, and this is either party would do this. You try to name it something that you would shame your colleagues into voting against, something like the Relief Act or the CARES Act, or I mean, it seems to be like you should try to make the Kitten Act, just anything.
Right. No. Right. Like I don't know that we have yet had the Santa Claus Act, but I think you're raising a fair point.
Yeah.
I think, but it is also about speaking to the values that are at play in the legislation, and certainly with the Relief Act, that is a very important value.
Yes, that is a fair one. The acronym does line up with the core principles behind the act.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.